Hey guys, what's going on? It's Jace of the Forestry Project. So in today's video, I kind of want to wrap up all the mapping stuff and show you how we can take the maps that we look at in the office and actually apply them to our land. That has been the biggest thing as far as actually getting out on your property and starting management. That's one of the biggest tricks that I know of to be able to actually start understanding your land and make it to where we're not having to manage 36 acres or 100 acres or even 10 acres. You're able to kind of split it down smaller than that based off of similar management, similar species, and that way you know that in that stand you know what needs to happen and you know what needs to happen in each of your other stands. So let's actually get into it. I'll show you how I go through mapping using Onyx, and you can see I will put my phone up in the corner so that you can see exactly what I'm looking at on the phone and when I start seeing. Depending on what you've been looking at last, you may not be at the location. So if you tap this little like target icon down here, it will take you to where you are. Now you can see I have already kind of been playing around with this a little bit, so I'm going to hide all of these, and this is going to be what I'm showing you how to make. So that'll kind of be the finished result. Let's get all of this hidden. Actually, let's not hide our property map. Yeah, okay. So now you can see we're back to just the property map, and you can see the little blue dot here is where I am currently. So there's a few really cool things you can do. If you go to tools, you can see like area shape that you can draw. You can add waypoints, mark your location, tell you your wind, add photos. We'll get to add photos in a little bit, and that may even be a later video, but that's a really cool function when you're actually starting to track progress. We were talking about that in episode 3 on the podcast. So when you're actually getting out, taking pictures of what you're doing, showing the before and after, is a really good way to be able to understand exactly how much progress you've made, because it's very easy to go out there and not think you're making progress, when in reality you're making a lot of progress. So what I'm going to be using today is this tracker function here, and that way we'll be able to start tracking where I'm walking. There's essentially 2 different ways you can go about mapping your property. The first way is to actually go in and as you're going, map out your polygons. However, sometimes that can be a little bit difficult because the polygons won't line up. There'll be a little bit of overlap, or maybe you're missing an area in between. You have to walk the same place twice, which sometimes is good and other times may not be as easy, especially if you have very difficult terrain or it's a very closed forest that has a lot of underbrush that you just can't walk through, especially here. As you can see behind me, there's quite a bit of privet that you wouldn't want to walk through many times. Okay, so we've talked about how to map your land. If you can see behind me, we kind of have this road going down through here, and that is going to be the first thing that I want to map. So I'm going to start the tracker. Let's walk down the road and let's actually get this put on the map, and I'll show you how I write everything down to keep up with it so that I can go back on the laptop later and actually edit it into a map that you can use on your property to manage it better. All right, so now that we've finished walking the road, we're up. So you can kind of see in the topography, we're getting right to that ravine where we would change stands, because the topography changes and the species composition changes. So we'll hit stop. So this is going to be road between the upland oak and Picosin. So then what I like to do is go ahead in your notes, look at some of the species to one side, what management you want to do, and then look at the other side, what species and what management. So I know in the oak, there's a lot of pine overstory with mixed hardwood. So there's a few sweet gum, and there is a few ash trees that are still present here. So I'll do just mixed hardwoods. And then I will do oak species is in the Pocosin area, and there's also some invasives we want to get rid of. So I want to make note of the invasive understory. And that way I'm able to make notes once I'm back at the computer that I can start being able to actually look at each stand and figure out what management I need to do. So next thing, make sure that we save that. And now we have a line that once we get back to the computer, we can actually go in and draw our polygons to that line and everything will match. We can also denote that as a road, and that way we're able to, it makes it a little bit easier instead of having to walk back and forth multiple times when you're actually doing the polygons. All right, so I did want to make a quick note. When you're out on your property and you're trying to follow it and map, topography is key because topography affects species. But when we're actually mapping everything out, make sure to pay attention to where the species actually change. So if you remember in the mapping video that we put out last week, we discussed that in Onyx, each topography line represented a 20-foot change in elevation. So one line was 20 foot higher than the other one. Well, maybe the species change in between those two lines instead of right at a line. So even if the topography has already started changing, or maybe it hasn't started changing yet, on the map, pay attention to the species. All right, so as you can see, we have walked kind of that ravine, and it didn't exactly follow the topography. We also didn't get quite to the property line, and that's fine, because when we're going in and actually editing it on the computer, it gets us close. So you can see we went across the dam. Now, why did we stop here? And that is one thing I want to kind of go back to on the last video where we talked about looking at the historic images and looking at the, past land use. So if you look behind me, I have a fence post here, another fence post there, and a fence running through there. Now, if you remember in our last video, we talked about that this property used to be farmed. So up behind the camera is, you're starting to get the terrace rows where you can tell they farmed. And then behind me here is where they had not farmed because of the pond, because of the ravine. So the species that are here are already fitting for kind of what I want to add to the Pocosin later on. So sometimes topography comes into play. Other times the historic land use can actually affect very dramatically what you want to do later on, just because it's a lot easier to accomplish going with the species that are kind of already present. So when we go to save all of this, this will be line between ravine, and you don't have to be super specific on all these. I remember, kind of where it is. And on the notes, I don't have to differentiate what is in the Pocosin again and what is in the upland hardwood stand. So really all I have to put is that the ravine is hardwoods with quite a few pines. I'm sorry, with quite a few oaks. So now let's finish. We'll go back around, go around the Pocosin and finish cutting off the Pocosin line, and then we can follow it on around the ravine to the property line and start mapping the back side of the property the same way. Okay, so as you can see now, my dot is fairly close. We're kind of close back up to that road. And like I said, it doesn't have to be exact when you're going through, just as long as it makes fairly close. We can go in and edit that later in the computer. But when you're deciding how to break apart your land, what do you actually look for? So how do we determine where you should break apart a stand if there's no topography? And that's where we go into either, like I was talking about earlier with the past land use, or maybe we look at the species that's currently out there. So as we start going around this Pocosin, I'll show you areas that you can tell the pines are going to be on one side, the hardwoods will be on another, and that's how we'll actually break apart the stand. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and start tracking again and finish going around this Pocosin, and I'll kind of show you what I'll look at. So while sometimes it may not be entirely obvious, other times we can just look at, we have a sweet gum. I stand corrected. We have a yellow poplar over here, and then we have a pine over there. So sometimes I'll try to walk through. Now the yellow poplar may not be Pocosin specific trees, but I just try to walk through and make it close. It doesn't have to be always exact. So continuing on with our conversation about species, and when you're mapping, paying attention to the species, and this kind of goes back into the latest podcast we're talking about ecology, getting out on your land and actually learning what species are out there. So it would be fairly easy to walk around this tree and not include it on the Pocosin stand. However, this is a willow, and willows are going to be growing near water, and they're going to be more of a hydric species that we would want to manage for in the Pocosin area. And any tree species that already is native to the area and viable to the management that we want to do is always good, because now I can look at this, go back to the Silvex manual and start looking at species that grow nearby this, and that may help us find a few species that we can put in the Pocosin area once we start restoring it. So I just want to give you a quick case to where actually understanding what species is out there and understanding the ecology of your site and the ecology of the species is important when you're starting management and when you're starting to map everything out. We've made it to the back side of the property. As you can see behind me a little bit, we have the fence here, and you can start to see on the phone that we've made the road. We went around the hardwood ravine, we've went around the Pocosin area, and we're starting to actually get this mapped out to where now I can start going back and making edits. And now we don't have to map everything just quite yet. I will go around this last little ravine area that in the first video I wouldn't go in because of the turkeys, and then I'll go around the pond. But I'm going to get a surveyor out to get exact property lines, and then I will go around. We have this little jut-in with the residential houses, and I'm going to want to put some kind of screening around that later on so that we have a little bit of privacy on our land. But I want to wait until I get the surveyor out, figure out exact property lines before I go in and actually map out where I want that screen to go. So let's walk over to the hardwood ravine. We'll see a little bit of how it's mapped, finish up the pond, and see how to work on this in the computer. So we are finishing up mapping the pond area. walking in the road out. And that's one thing I want to talk about also when we're breaking apart stands. Look at what's already out there. So this road makes an excellent fire break. So I want to go ahead and use it as a stand boundary, and that way I can also use it to have a fire break, manage two stands independently. But let's actually look at the computer and see how it looks on a bigger screen and how we actually get from the lines that I'm drawing into polygons and areas so we can actually map out, make notes on. That way we know what's out there and we can actually start managing it better. So let's hop on the computer and see how that looks. Okay, so now we have mapped everything out, and you can see that is the blue checked lines, or dashed lines through here. Real quick, this is a map that I created in the office just looking at the topography. And you can see where some of them line up similar and then some of them don't. So always getting out on your property is the best case scenario, and by drawing out these lines it provides us a little bit more accuracy when we're making our maps. So we're going to go back, let's hide all of those, and I will show you how we actually draw that again on the property using a computer program. So we're going to keep the property line. Now let's go to over here under tools. You'll see draw shape. You'll click on draw shape, and the first stand I want to do, I'm going to call this the oak savanna, and we're going to have it click to draw, and you'll see I'm going a little bit off of property map, so I'm going to start right here at the property line. That'll be my first point, and then I want to go to there. Right here is an old garden, so I don't want to mark it, and then I'm going to go over to where we've done the road, and I'm going to follow the road roughly. Now it doesn't have to be exact, but I'm going to follow the road down to where it meets. And then I'll do the same thing for where I drew the hardwood stand, or the ravine, and there is our first stand. So now we know it's about 3 acres. We'll hit save. Now let's do the Picosin the same way. So go back to draw shape. Name this Picosin. Then we're going to click our first point right on there and just draw this around. It doesn't have to be perfect, but by using the tracking function and walking it out on the property, it does make it a little bit closer. Now, if you want to, you can zoom in here and actually fit them to each other. And that way they fit fairly closely. And you can see there's a few spots that aren't exact, but that's fine. So let's do that for the other stands and actually see what this entire map would look like. Okay, so I've actually drawn out all the stands following our tracks. I created a new folder, which you just go to add folder, type in the name of it, click save, and then to save those new points, I went in and I need to save the home site area. So you just click the 3 dots, add to folder, updated stand map, and it's there. So now we have a map that's updated stand map, and it shows everything. Now, one of the really cool things that OnX lets you do, we discussed pictures and we discussed notes, so let's show how to use notes in a computer. So if we go to, let's go here, I'm going to click on this, and here's the oak savanna. So let's edit. And now we can go in and make notes. So now I said that the overstory is mostly pine, understory is oak, sweet gum and privet. And if you wanted to, you could even go as far as to say what the management activity should be, what species you want to get out there. All right, so now we've added a little bit of management activities. Then we can go back to the future. Now, we can also save that, and once we go back out there, we can take pictures, we can add pictures to it, you can see the pictures in there, and we can start tracking it over time. And we can do that for each of these stands. And that way then I can send this map to other people and they know what I'm doing. So the next thing is, let's go ahead and get the waypoints that we've drawn hidden. Don't necessarily want to delete them yet, but we can hide them. So that is how you go from a map with nothing on it to we now have stands and we know how we want to manage each one of these, and we know they're separate species, and now we can go in and actually start getting active management done. So with that, guys, I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you get something useful out of it and you're able to go out to your property and actually start mapping it, understanding your land, looking at the species that's out there, and start trying to achieve Forest Legacy Reimagined. I'm really excited to hear from you. If you start doing this, send me what you're able to do and send me some of the feedback. Talk about cool species you found, wildlife. Today I got to see a snapping turtle at one of the ponds, and we also got to see the turkey again. So any day in the woods is always a good day. But I would love to hear your experiences out in the woods, what you're able to see, what you're able to accomplish. Thank you all again very much for your support. If you would, and you haven't yet, I ask that you please subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a lot. Also follow us on social media. We are at _forestry project on Instagram and the Forestry Project on Facebook. We're trying to put a lot of content out there and trying to improve our content each time we put stuff out. With that, thank you very much for watching. Happy management and God bless.